Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, and this is part one of a three-part series on a subject dear to my heart, Archetypal Synchronistic Resonance. With me is Dr. Brendan Engen, a clinical psychologist from Waycross, Georgia. Back in 2007, Brendan and I co-authored a paper published in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology titled Archetypal Synchronistic Resonance, a New Theory of Paranormal Experience. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
And actually, even though we wrote this paper together some 9 years ago, this is really the first occasion of our being together in person.
That's right.
and so it's a double pleasure.
Yes, thank you very much. For me as well.
It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with the wider video audience some of the most fascinating events that brought us together so long ago. We began experiencing a series of parallel synchronicities that connected us back in around 2005.
That's
and
right. Yes.
That eventually led us to co-author this paper together. In part two of our three-part series, we will describe in great detail the personal experiences that we had. But for now, I think it's important to sort of define our terms and describe the theoretical background for a concept like archetypal synchronistic resonance. And I think a good way to start will be to talk about how it can serve as a bridge between absolute skepticism on the one hand regarding these kinds of experiences and religious true belief on the other.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, as I understand it, or as I've been trying to formulate that with you, archetypal synchronistic resonance is really a way of trying to make sense of some very unusual phenomena, paranormal phenomena, and it's trying to do so in a way that doesn't necessarily require a literal belief in the contents of that experience. So, for instance, in our paper we talk primarily about rebirth or reincarnation.
Yes.
Within the context of this theory, one can find that experience to be very valuable, very psychologically valuable, very edifying in some way, very important, without necessarily subscribing to a literal belief in reincarnation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of the appeal, certainly for me, I suspect for you as well.
As well, because the synchronicities came within a context in which we were each given past lives that we had supposedly had.
Yes,
and that's why you reached out to me, because
absolutely.
of the notion that we had known each other back in ancient Rome.
Right, yes, indeed,
and,
exactly.
The intriguing thing is that there is a synchronistic connection there that we'll be talking about.
Yes.
But neither of us was really ready to embrace the idea of reincarnation in this case.
Absolutely.
But we don't want to discount it either.
No, indeed. I mean, I certainly hold out the possibility that may be true. But this is sort of an alternative way, I think, of trying to make sense of these experiences.
And the additional benefit of a theory of archetypal synchronistic resonance is that it connects our experience into the vast and very well articulated realm of Jungian dynamic psychology.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, one of the core concepts to the theory is, or one of the core components to the theory is the idea of archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
And that, as we use the term in the paper, I think we use it in a broadly Jungian sense, that archetypes have to do with these primal ideas or images that are, as Jung put it, just endowments of the psyche, things that we're more or less born with. And we may not be aware of them until the right experience comes along to activate them or release them, so to speak. And so, for instance, an example of that would be something like, the rebirth archetype, which has to, from a Jungian standpoint, primarily has to do with a psychological transformation. It may literally, allude to some sort of death and rebirth of a hero or mythological figure. But from a Jungian standpoint, what it really has to do with, for the person who is having that archetypal experience, is some sort of transformation or transition that person is going through.
In Jungian terminology, the archetype represents a potential.
It's a potential, indeed. And it's not, Jung was very clear in pointing out that these aren't actually clear representations in the mind. He said they're dispositions to form certain representations. They're dispositions to form certain images. So in a way, they precede, as it were, prefigure actual representative consciousness.
We could easily spend all 3 half hours just on the theory of archetypes.
Absolutely.
It's very rich and complex and sometimes even confusing. One of the interesting things that you did in writing the paper is note that there's a relationship between the Jungian archetype and concepts that have been evolving in a whole other area of psychology, evolutionary theory.
Yes, indeed. In fact, some researchers are making that connection more directly. Edinger, for instance, I believe has called attention to that. But there is a concept in Lorenz's and Terbergen's ethological theory of what they call an innate releasing mechanism, which has to do with a dormant potential that remains largely dormant in an organism until there's a right sign stimulus, as they say, or the right experience. So, for instance, looking at an animal, a rodent, for instance, crawling on the ground, might see a shadow of a hawk on the ground and immediately have activated in it a behavior to escape or to run down a hole. It's automatic. There's no real kind of thinking going on with it. And similarly, I think even human beings probably experience those things fairly routinely.
So they're biological
potentials. That's right. Indeed.
We could say.
Right. That's right.
Now, let me go back a bit because I want to make one other point about the theory of archetypes and synchronicity. As a parapsychologist, I'm accustomed to thinking in terms of extrasensory perception and psychokinesis, and viewers of my videos will know we do a lot of programs about that. The Jungian theory of synchronicity is sometimes thought of as an alternative within parapsychology. It has the benefit of not being wedded to an information transmission model, a causal and effect model, because one of the great embarrassments for the theory of extrasensory perception is we've never identified a channel of information transmission nor an organ of perception for ESP. So it suggests something altogether different might be going on. And the Jungian notion of synchronicity is, let me just say, is a first step.
Indeed, that's right.
In looking at another way of thinking about it, rather than information transmission, some parapsychologists would use the term a conformance model.
Yes. And as we discussed earlier, kind of a correspondence, absolutely. And that's what's interesting to me about Jung's theory is that synchronicity doesn't imply or doesn't require this view that information is somehow broadcast from one being to another over some span of time. In fact, Jung would say that there appears to be no causal connection between the individuals involved, or between the events involved, I should say, when a synchronicity is occurring. And he, as I said, he described it as an acausal kind of theory. I would prefer to call it maybe sort of an alternative causal theory. In other words, it's not, it doesn't imply or require a belief in for that experience in, let's say, efficient causation. That is something, an event preceding something else is bringing about.
That Aristotle's
about the concept
different forms of causation.
Yes, absolutely. Aristotle also thought there's final causation and formative causation and material causation. And I think one of the advantages of Jung's theory is that it can tap into those ideas as well. And I think really explain pretty elegantly a lot of these experiences, paranormal experiences.
Well, I know many people would critique Jung for being vague, and he's trying so hard to describe something so very elusive.
Absolutely. And he ended up, I think, having to use very general or very abstract terms. And that's, so I can understand that critique. But nonetheless, that may be sort of a requirement when we're dealing with, with information of this sort, with phenomena of this sort.
So what happened between us is an ostensible past life connection that we began reinterpreting as archetypal synchronistic resonance. And we talked a little bit about archetypes. We really should try and define our terms a little more.
Absolutely. So with synchronicity, as I said, Jung characterized it as a meaningful coincidence between two events that that's beyond mere chance or probability. And then as I said before, in his later accounts of the concept, he even described it as an acausal kind of coincidence.
An acausal connection.
That's right.
Let's talk about the classic example that Jung used.
Yes. He cited, as one of the examples, he cited a dream that one of his patients reported. It was a woman he had been treating for some time. She was having various struggles. She was, I think, kind of felt very stagnant and kind of stultified in her life. And, in the dream, the dream she mentioned to Jung involved a scarab beetle, an Egyptian scarab beetle. And as she was describing this to Jung, according to his account, he heard a weird rattling on the window in his office,
like
and a tapping. And he went to investigate, and oddly enough, it turned out to be a beetle. And as he put it, he said it was the closest approximation to a scarab beetle in that latitude in Austria or wherever he happened to be.
A European beetle
looked
like the Egyptian scarab.
Indeed, exactly. And that experience, he was able to apparently skillfully kind of bring that into the therapy session. And according to his account, that experience ended up helping this woman overcome, some rigid patterns in her life. It kind of changed her understanding of some things. It facilitated her growth, in other words.
So people often these days think of synchronicities as little signs from the universe. You're on the right path.
That's right.
Typically.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And typically, in this example, Jung seemed to suggest that these synchronicities can be related to moments of psychological importance.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think that was one of the, kind of one of the core features of his description of it, is that it almost always involves some sort of important transition developmentally for the person. So if they're having a synchronistic experience, it must mean that psychologically they're involved in some sort of developmental crisis or developmental struggle, or in the process of crossing some sort of developmental threshold that's going to be very important to them. And the ultimate sort of driving force in Jungian thought is what he called individuation, which is, he described it differently in different places, but essentially it means kind of having a maximal awareness of your unconscious, your conscious and unconscious mind. And it also, as I understand it, means bringing the conscious and unconscious portions of the psyche into an alignment. That's right.
So you're not battling your unconscious.
That's right. Exactly. They're not at war with each other. And you're not just reflecting on them, but you're actually making use of that information in some way to facilitate kind of your next developmental step. Absolutely.
Now, we've also added the word resonance.
Yes.
And that adds an important dimension to what we're talking about for several reasons.
Yes, indeed. Because in Jung's original account, as we discussed earlier, in Jung's original account of synchronicity, they involved events that were simultaneous in time. Our account does not require that construal, and that's where I think resonance plays a part in qualifying our understanding of synchronicity. Resonance here has to do with the identification or the sense of familiarity or affinity with someone that is separated from us, either across vast stretches of space or time, so to speak. So they could be on the other side of the world, or they could have lived maybe thousands of years ago.
In this case, we're talking about the example that we have come to experience with personal resonance we each had with figures who lived 2,000 years ago.
Indeed, exactly.
The ancient Roman Empire.
That's right. That's right.
And so it's a resonance across time.
Yes.
Jung said that the theory of synchronicity suggested to him that the psyche was not limited to space inside the skull, that the psyche exists throughout all space.
Yes.
If we add time, it suggests that the psyche exists throughout space and time.
Exactly. And I think that's what our theory would suggest. Absolutely. So it is, it's adhering to what I would consider to be kind of a panpsychist view of the cosmos.
Which is a very ancient philosophy.
It's a very ancient philosophy, and it's essentially, as I understand it, it says that mental and physical phenomena are always correlated at every level of existence.
Down to the finest subatomic particles.
Exactly. They're not just, mindless phenomena.
There's a kind of proto-consciousness everywhere, and we don't have the time to go into that now, but
that's exactly.
People have done that, and surely the data of parapsychology gives one pause to reflect on.
Indeed, absolutely.
On that.
Yes.
Now, another meaning, I think, of the term resonance that we use here is that we didn't just experience between us a single synchronicity.
That's right.
But a series of them.
That's right. Absolutely.
One after another.
That's right.
Resonating, most of them going way back in time. But here we are. Now it's almost 30 years since the first of those synchronicities occurred, and the energy of it, the import of it, is so powerful that we're still talking about it.
That's right. Absolutely.
Devoting this time to going into it now.
Exactly. Absolutely. That's very true. That they as we mentioned before, they a lot of these synchronicities seem to be kind of nested within each other in many respects, and and including the one of the synchronicities which I'll mention later on was being told by an individual that I would meet you ultimately, and obviously that's actually occurring as we speak.
You finally met me. Well, we have some time, so perhaps we could set the stage.
Sure, absolutely.
A little bit and talk about just how it is that we first encountered each other. I was in Spain.
Yes, that's right.
At the time, attending a conference in Madrid.
Yes.
The conference was ending, and I was about to take a little vacation to visit the town of Cordoba, Spain, which was kind of a pilgrimage for me because it's the town where the ancient Roman philosopher Seneca was born.
Yes,
and it's a beautiful little city in Spain. I'd been there before, and I was looking forward to going there again when I received an email out of the blue from you, a person whom I had never met before.
Exactly. That's right. I had just maybe a day or two before I discovered your email address on I think on your website, and I decided to contact you about an experience I had had.
This is 2005.
This is 2005. That's right. And I should perhaps maybe give some context for that. Composing that email, I had just recently completed my doctoral program in California, and as sort of a present, my wife has interests in many of these subjects, including reincarnation, but she had gotten me an appointment with a trance medium over the phone. And she thought that, it might be interesting for me to experience this. And I think it was maybe an hour and a half session conversation. And I really didn't have any exposure to anything like that previously, not directly.
You weren't interested in that sort of thing?
Not especially. I mean, I was somewhat interested, but it wasn't something that was kind of a driving interest.
If your wife hadn't given you this gift,
I wouldn't have done it. If she hadn't had mentioned it, I wouldn't have pursued this. It just wasn't kind of my, in my set of interests at that time.
Sure.
But I thought, I'll have fun with this. If nothing else, it can be kind of enjoyable. Just let's see what happens. My wife certainly seemed to get a lot from hers. So I thought, well, maybe for that reason, it might be worthwhile. So I had a conversation with this individual.
Kevin Ryerson.
Kevin Ryerson, exactly.
Who's somebody I've interviewed in the past.
Yes, absolutely. I think I'm sure he won't mind if I disclose that, but he's
a very well-known trance channel.
Yes, absolutely.
And has been a friend of mine for over 30 years, somebody whom I regard as an individual of the highest personal integrity.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And he channels different entities to convey information about their life. And as he began the session with me, I noticed from the outset that he knew things about me, or seemed to know things about me at the very least, that I didn't think there was any way he could know details about my history, details about relationships that were very significant, ended up, in fact, even inspiring my choice of career, and other things that I thought, my goodness, how could he possibly know this through conventional means? And I really didn't have any information like this on the internet, so it wasn't as if he was accessing, as far as I know, something that
I regard Kevin and
absolutely, that was my sense too,
as a gifted intuitive.
Yes.
In terms of the entities that come through him in channeling, I don't know whether they are authentic, external entities or products of his imagination, or more likely products of his own subconscious mind.
Indeed.
But I do find that the information he comes up with is often uncanny.
Absolutely. And that was certainly the case. And I saw that immediately in terms of the conversation I had. But then he ultimately started getting into a discussion of my past life material. And there were various lives he went into, not just the one that I allegedly had in Rome, but one of the things that stood out about that material, especially his account of the lifetime that we lived in contemporaneously, supposedly, was that he knew about my interest in Seneca.
Seneca, the ancient Roman
philosopher.
Who lived right around the time of Christ.
That's right, indeed. That's right. He lived, I think, until about 65 in the Common Era, and was had been a Roman senator and statesman, but also a writer, a very beautiful writer. Wrote plays as well as philosophical essays.
So you have had a long-standing interest.
I had a long-standing interest in Seneca and other Stoic philosophers like Epictetus, that there's no way that Kevin could have known, that Atun Ray could have known about.
Atun Ray being the name of the spirit
That's
guide.
Right, exactly. And so that information was given to me. And
he suggested that you knew Seneca.
He suggested I knew Seneca, and and not only that, he said that you, in fact, were the person that the person you are now was Seneca at that time,
right? And
that I would meet you.
I would be the present incarnation.
That you're the present incarnation
of Seneca.
That's right. Exactly.
There's a reason why he thought that this to be the case.
Yes,
I'd had previous interactions with him. About it. So he identified me as that person and said, "You will someday meet him."
Yes, that's right. Exactly. That's right. He was very clear about that. And he conveyed this very confidently. Well, I was as we ended the conversation, I was left feeling very intrigued. I could kind of feel like my worldview was shifting a bit, kind of like, well, how do I make sense of this? Because I really didn't believe in anything like reincarnation prior to that. I had maybe kind of considered it as a theory, but I hadn't really applied it to anything or had any kind of personal experience.
Right.
And so I kind of felt like some things were shifting kind of in my own internal world. And I was very, very intrigued by the information. And I thought, well, I wonder what you would think of this. I was wondering, I wonder if Dr. Mishlove is...
You were intrigued.
I was intrigued.
You were also, I think, a little bit embarrassed.
I was a little embarrassed, and
your tough-minded self.
That's right.
Was ready to reject.
I was ready to reject it, but then I thought, well, that's not quite right, you know, because as I said, he did say some things that ended up being very helpful, and very therapeutic in a sense. So I thought, well, maybe it would be worthwhile to try to contact Dr. Mishlove just to see if. What his sense of this is, how he makes sense of it. And that's when I subsequently
sent me an email.
I sent you an email. That's right.
And I thought it was very striking.
Yes.
A coincidence of sort that your email suggesting that you had been told by Kevin Ryerson that I was the incarnation of Seneca should arrive just as I'm about to embark on a journey to the city where Seneca was born.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that was a synchronicity.
That was a definite synchronicity. Absolutely.
Well, Brendan Engen, our first half hour is just about over. So it's been a pleasure digging into this material with you. Thank you so much for being with me.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
And thank you for being with us. Be sure to check your listings for part 2 of our 3-part series on archetypal synchronistic resonance. In part 2, we'll talk more about the series of events that occurred between us and the psychological significance of them.